Talking about Graham Hancock today, this guy has recently gotten, I think, a lot more widespread notice because of his show on Netflix. Was this Ancient Civilizations or Ancient Apocalypse? I think was the title of it, and I think they specifically cover the image that we're looking at right now. Lucas, you've been looking into this pretty deeply.
I have. This is Göbekli Tepe right now that we're looking at. And this is a site that was discovered in, I believe, somewhere around 1995 and was ignored for a very long time. But it is incredibly significant because of the age of this site. And it is from it's over 11,000 years old. So this is one of I say one of now. I think they're going to be possibly discovering more. There's Karen Tepe. I think Tepe means hill. Karen Tepe near this site that has recently been discovered. But going back to Graham Hancock, he is getting a lot more traction. I think he's very new on my radar. I was obliquely aware of him, but I love Mesoamerican, Native American history, and in talking about that through, especially the last couple of years, as he's gained more recognition, people had said, "Check out Graham Hancock. He has some of these notions." I would go to this Wikipedia page and be somewhat turned off by some of the language that I see in here, pseudoscientific.
Yeah, they're not painting a positive picture of Graham Hancock here. They're basically calling him a kook in no uncertain terms. In the polite language of Wikipedia, this doesn't get much more passive aggressively damning on what they're like giving him here.
That's a good way of putting it. In maybe not even passive aggressive. This is it's, and I think it's very unfair. Um, and not only that, but it calls into mind, there is a prevailing notion of, and we've talked about Folsom, New Mexico here before, but Folsom, New Mexico, there was a man in 1904. There was, and it's interesting also in this year of floods all around the world, several here in the United States, but we had some in Minnesota, North Carolina. We had some in the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma that didn't get as much coverage, but they weren't as severe because we don't have, it's a lot flatter here. But 1904, like 2024, was a year of many floods across the United States, heavy rainfall everywhere. And in one of those floods near Folsom, New Mexico, it washed away 30 feet along a creek. And a man who was working on a ranch there, George McJunkin, discovered a strange projectile point, a strange arrowhead, and that arrowhead was revealed on the side of the bank, and it was obvious that it was stuck in between two rib bones of an ancient bison, and a bison antiquus is much larger than the bison, the American bison that we barely have any left of in the Americas today. But he knew whenever he saw that he had discovered something ancient, and he was never given credit. He was ridiculed his entire life because his find, the Folsom point, the Folsom site, questioned the prevailing narrative, and the prevailing narrative said that the world was only a couple thousand years old, and we know that to be incredibly false. And in I don't know that understanding of the world, or especially the Americas having people in them going back to 14,000 years ago, was accepted until the 50s, maybe the 70s. It's very, very slow. And you have this phenomenon of archaeologists, or quote unquote scientists, people with their who are reticent to accept any new ideas, or any unconfirmed, or to their mind unconfirmed alternative understandings of especially history, they didn't believe him, and they didn't believe him for some time. So knowing the story of George McJunkin and being sympathetic to the notion that a whole bunch of people can be wrong. I also, again, I'm very interested in Native American cosmology. There we go. There's George McJunkin.
I think the trouble sometimes it gets into when you have somebody who's trying to buck the established narrative, because this certainly happens, but there have been a lot of scientists or pseudoscientists that have said that they thought they were onto something, and then it was due to their not being fully well read on some of the existing literature. You know, these ideas that it might be one thing or another, and then somebody who's pretty well knowledgeable in the space said, yeah, but if you had looked into this, you would have known that that was already a dead end line of thinking. I think in physics that happens quite a bit, but then you got somebody like Eric Weinstein who comes around and says there's a bunch of stuff that's essentially we're being shepherded away from for some particular reason, and it's not entirely obvious why that occurs. So there's definitely politics in science, and I think sometimes you have somebody come in and they're bucking the orthodoxy, and that's pretty hard to get traction. That's where you get labeled one of these pseudoscientists.
Well, it's also interesting that Graham Hancock gets labeled a racist, and the reasoning there is that some find his claim that there was an older civilization, or that humans had been around for a long time and there had been a cataclysmic event 12,000 years ago, as demeaning or taking away from the Native American peoples. I think we got to step back a bit from that. One, it's also interesting that George McJunkin was a black cowboy, and possibly that was part of the reason that he didn't go to Harvard or Princeton and jump into archaeology from that vantage point. Archaeology has long been, or especially in the early years, was the province of I don't know, rich boys who had gone to elite universities and didn't have to worry about getting a job in their adult life, and they could go dig around ancient ruins. But I think it's also interesting in that now we have the irony that in perpetuating that the charge of racism is leveled to perpetuate the narrative that civilization comes from Sumeria. And we have this fascination in our political narrative of the United States that we're taking from concepts from the Greeks and the Romans and the earlier Greeks, and their civilization grew out of Sumeria. And maybe that's not right. Maybe they're we do know that humans come out of Africa on a lot broader time scale. Why do we have this narrative of civilization, of republics and democracy as coming from the Greeks? I certainly know that the political experiment of the United States, or of the Americas, was to borrow many ideas of political order from the native peoples, the Iroquoian Confederacy, the story of Hiawatha, and not only that, but we have taken their fascination with games, and go look around the world prior to the Columbian Exchange, Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, and tell me how many soccer matches or tennis games there were in Western Europe. And I tell you, zero. And the notion of so many of the games that we play, and also tobacco use and fascination with other drugs. These are some things actually that Graham Hancock also gets into. Are certainly were were reintroduced or had a refascination with after Columbian contact.
Do you know if the reason Graham Hancock named his books the ways that he did was he giving a call out to the other of the gods book that had been written prior to this, Chariots of the Gods? Do you have you has he you've ever heard him talk about that?
You know, I no, I don't. I know that he was actually a reporter for The Economist, and started down this track of questioning history and questioning the narrative of ancient history, because he was stationed in Nairobi, Kenya. And in Nairobi, Kenya, when he had gone to Ethiopia, and this was in the late 80s, he discovered, or he heard, you know, in the wake of Harrison Ford and the Indiana Jones movie about the Ark of the Covenant. I forget which Indiana Jones movie that was. But in Ethiopia,
It's the first one. It's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
okay, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay, there we go. I don't. So there's so many titles. You know, who knows? Indiana Jones, the one with the Ark, the one where he burns his hand on for the map. But you know, that was that had brought the Ark, you know, to his attention. And when in Ethiopia, an Ethiopian monk had said, "Well, of course, we have the actual Ark here in Ethiopia," and that led him down to questioning, did Ethiopia actually have the Ark? And this was his first book, The Sign and the Seal, addresses the possibility of what actually happened to the Ark, and how a Jewish community that adhered to the Torah, but not the, now I'm blanking on the Talmud, had not incorporated the Talmud into their religion. So how did an ancient sect of Judaism come to be in Ethiopia, and how did that fit in with the possible history of the Ark? So that kind of led him onto a question of questioning history. But you know, going back to what I found, or I don't know. Do you have any questions of that? I kind of want to get back to Mesoamerican, like native religions, and some things that are becoming very apparent over here. But
Well, I mean, I'm picking up on the origin story. So he was this guy. He's writing at The Economist. He stumbles across some stuff. So he doesn't necessarily have the right background, right, to be getting into this stuff. But then that's why we're saying, well, hey, wait, there's you know, some just cowboys that can find stuff. I suppose nothing really stops anybody from finding something out in the desert if you stumble across the right spot.
well, and he was also in questioning traditional archaeologists about the narrative of the Ark and what was possible. He was amazed that archaeologists were quick to discount things that did not line up with their time frame. And when your time frame starts from the world is 5 or 6,000 years old, and then like, oh, wait a second, humans are only 5 or 6,000 years old, or culture is only 5 or 6,000 years old. You know, his questioning on how these things could have happened, they just absolutely discounted them, because in order for that to have happened, it would have had to have been a much longer arc of human history. And so, you know, nut job, because the doesn't line up. Timeline doesn't line up. Well, you know, fast forward. I mean, actually, not that many years for the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, but much later in history, you know, here in 20 years later, we begin to find out that the age of that site is in a timeline that lines up with the narrative. And part of this too goes back to an assumption that the myths and the narratives of ancient Egyptians and in the Bible are artificial. You know, couldn't have been that old. There must have been some sort of compression of time. But maybe it is that old.
Well, I think that certainly happens in science quite a bit. You go out there with a certain set of assumptions, you know, and I think this prevailing one was very common during an era, but I think scientists have pretty well been not thinking that you know, the Earth was anywhere near the kind of timeline that some would have gone out with the assumption looking for. So you're saying that the 11,000 years really challenged this idea of 5 to 6,000 as the age of civilization, and it was a really good first example. But I thought we had quite a bit of evidence even prior to that. That are you saying that really this was one of the first major ones that in America, or was it that they were really on the vanguard of this, pushing back the earliest states of civilization?
I think he on the vanguard, and there have been a couple of sites that were pushed out. Well, one, you know, we also know that the pyramids in the Americas are older than the pyramids or some of the pyramids in Egypt. Many of the pyramids in Egypt. So you know, also quite fascinating, and Graham has ideas that some of the mounds or very old pyramids that exist here in the Americas are possibly incredibly ancient too. So I don't know as much about the timeline of those sites, but I guess I should also cut to, you know, he has an explanation for what could have possibly occurred, and this has to do with a belief that 12,000 years ago there was when the Earth passed through a meteor shower, which we continue to pass through to this day. And we passed
That's
through it.
not, is that the Perseid meteor shower?
No, it's not Perseid. It's the Taurid. Um, and I think maybe Taurid has something to do with the Taurus, the constellation of Taurus. But the Taurid meteor shower, and we passed through it. You know, it's a belt of debris that the path of the Earth in its orbit around the sun passes through twice a year, and you know, we pass through it in the middle of summer, and then right now here at the end of October. And I think we may be passing through it up. You know, it takes a while to pass through the actual like full belt of debris, and continues you know, a couple weeks into November. So yeah, Taurids are an annual meteor shower. So there's this notion that possibly 12,000 years ago, the meteor, a much larger meteor, had been captured by the gravity of the sun, and also begun to melt and break up. And we also have geological evidence that 12,000 years ago, there was a melting period. You know, we had this ice age in which ocean levels, there was so much ice captured in massive glaciers. You live up in the Great Lakes. These are the glaciers that did a lot of carving of the Great Lakes. And so right there in your area of Minnesota, massive floods were occurring as these meteors struck the Earth, and changed the jet streams, and changed the climate trajectory that had heretofore been happening in the world. And so they postulate that this was a catastrophic event, and because, you know, they've also begun to find some of these impact craters. I believe one exists under the ice sheet in Greenland, but they due to the orientation of the Earth when it was passing through this meteor belt, much of the northern hemisphere was struck, and you know, I'm not sure the name of it, but there was in 1908 there was a meteor that struck in Russia, and knocked trees over for very large, because they melt and they blow up in the sky, by the way, too. So most of these meteors are going to be blowing up in the sky, but having a massive explosion and anyway, this is their notion as to what greater event occurred to cause a shift in climate, and also could have led to a collapse of civilization at that point. And again, I think that's also very interesting, because those who are reticent to believe it would say, how could this happen? There must be a God. Why would God let this happen? Surely we are the first. But I think as we also come to a point in our lives and civilization to begin to question, can humanity leave the earth? Can humanity move to Mars? If so, and we've been around for a couple million years, could we have not have done this before? Or a couple 100,000 years even, could we have not have done this before? And I think that we need to go back and readdress the narrative of
Well,
what has happened
I
in
think
society.
there's, when the idea of a civilization, I think that there's been a fair amount of looking back historically, history of science. What were the important advancements that allowed certain things to occur? And there are kind of these very accidental moments of things that can occur, but without those very accidental things that have happened, it's hard to contemplate how you could develop certain types of technology. I think quantum theory is a really good example of this. If you look at what did what did humanity have to be on the trajectory of doing to ever want to look at these hot rocks? I mean, that's kind of what it boils down to, is like, why did we ever start looking into radiation? Because you had these things that were sort of didn't fit in with the existing ideas of the world, like something that just was out of character, and somebody who said, well, I'm just going to keep goofing around with this. And it just so happened that we had started to develop photography at the time, and so then you had these two things coming together. So these are some of the things that I think about when I put my thinking cap on to say, how plausible is it that humanity would have found a different trajectory, yet developed something that would be substantially advanced, that we would recognize as saying, well, they did something either that was parallel, or maybe some way that they were more advanced in some way. And I think another one that comes to mind is these ideas of Damascus steel, or of the roads that the Romans were capable of making, and the concrete that we'd had a hard time replicating for a long time, because we lost some little very esoteric piece of knowledge that allowed these things to happen. I don't know how much of those things resonate with these ideas. Does it seem like they get into some of those, of like what were the technological advancements, or do we just have so little information about it that it's hard to even put any sort of a timeline on what it is that this civilization was producing?
Well, Graham would say that myths are incredibly important and have been over discounted. And I would say that he goes back to the Bible to answer specifically that question. And I don't we have some narratives that come from the Bible that we accept, and maybe some things that we've believed were the hand of God. But Graham says, what if there were technologies that we are discounting, and specifically the Ark of the Covenant? If you go back to the Bible, the Bible tells the story of the Ark of the Covenant being used as a weapon. And not only that, but the Ark of the Covenant is a gold box with a wooden box inside, with a gold box inside, with a very strange rock that exists inside of it. And opening up that box could be used as a very powerful weapon. And when the box was discovered by or taken by, I believe, the Philistines, and 20,000 of them opened it and looked at it, it gave them symptoms that sound very much like radiation poisoning to us today. So it's quite possibly that we have discounted the technologies an older and an ancient world, and attributed that to myth, to God, to magic.
I kind of agree with you on this kind of topic, Lucas. I get to thinking about, there's lots of stories of ancient technologies and ancient civilizations and things that we almost can't even replicate today. You look at some of the temples that you were talking about over in Africa, and they were built into the ground. There's some of the cave systems that are around the world, and how the caves almost become cities inside and have their own ecosystems within these caves. And I think back to these ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and the Indians and the Mayans and all the technology that they had and the cosmology knowledge that they blended together. And I think that, you were speaking to it earlier that the world went through this time of the melting of the caps and the water rising. And one of the things that always struck me that somebody said, I was watching, I forget what documentary it was, but they mentioned that we know less about the depths of our ocean than we do about outer space. And if you look at all the cities and all the different structure that are underneath our ocean that we don't even know about, and what secrets could be held within discovering those, like you look and you see there's all kinds of cities that are underneath the ocean between Great Britain and England, or Great Britain and the rest of Europe. And you look at down in the Philippines, there's lots of different civilizations that are buried underneath the water.
Yeah, and I mean, look at what happened in North Carolina with a 100-year flood recently. That's having an incredibly devastating impact on the people who are living there. And if archaeologists were really worth their salt, they would be answering some of these questions and going out and checking the continental shelves, or doing more research under the ice cap in the polar areas. But their response is, well, who's going to pay for it? And so a lot of times when I hear now when I consider the arguments of traditional archaeologists, I'm reminded of the old joke of, guy who's looking for his keys under a street lamp in a parking lot, and somebody says, where'd you lose them? He said, over there, but it's in the dark. How could I ever find my keys in the dark? I'm looking here under the light. And I think that we should be looking for some of these answers much deeper in under the ground. It's also interesting that we have greater technologies like LiDAR, and I don't know if you guys saw the earlier release that announcing a city in the Yucatan that was something like 1,500 yards off a major road, and was so covered by the jungle that nobody's found it or bothered to venture out that far into the jungle in what last 100 years of archaeological fascination with that area and Mayan cities. And it took like actually flying a drone over it with some technological equipment to penetrate the jungle and to come back and say, oh yeah, there was a city here. And we are also having more LiDAR mapping projects that come out of the Amazon to say, wow, when Ariano and Carival accidentally sailed down the Amazon after the conquistadors took over the Inca, and they went on a hunting trip, accidentally sailed all the way down the Amazon, and reported back that there were massive cities that were built on stilts the entire way. And they took months going down the Amazon, mind you, and had, were stopped in many villages along the way, got to know the people, ate, drank, whatever. Finally made it to the mouth of the Amazon, built some ships, and followed the stars back over to Portugal or to Spain. Their accounts of the civilizations of the Amazon were disregarded for 100 years, 150 years afterwards. And people would say, well, why they not that, actually like 400 years afterwards. And the responses 100 years later, when explorers went into the Amazon, was, why did these people lie? Why would they lie to such a great extent about these massive civilization that existed along the Amazon? Well, I don't think they were lying. I don't think it took that long for the jungle to cover up what was left after smallpox and other diseases devastated their communities.
So have you had a chance to watch the show on Netflix? How good are they doing as far as exploring these ideas, or haven't you had a chance to catch it yet?
I haven't had a chance, and I don't know that I will. I'd rather read the books, quite honestly. But I'm sure they're great. But I'm not, you know me. I don't watch a lot of television.
I think sometimes one thing that's nice about a show like this is they'll actually show you the places because they go to the spots and they show video footage. That might be kind of interesting. I mean, I would agree in my opinion, the information density of a TV show is too low to really get me super excited about it. You know, when you start listening to audiobooks and you can do it on 2x, and the information density that's flying at you is so much higher than what a scripted TV show can have. It just doesn't even compare. You know, you really get a lot more, I think, from listening to any of the audiobooks that are the source material for whatever they make out of the show. But yeah, sometimes the going on site and seeing what they're actually talking about in the book is pretty powerful. So it looks like they're doing a pretty good job actually going on location and shooting this stuff.
Well, and I've seen some clips of it, some promotional clips. Maybe I will, but I'm, you know, I'd also. I haven't heard Graham Hancock talk that much about Mesoamerican, Native American religions, and this I'm most interested in because you know, he must know some of these things, but you know, Rusty, you live in Durango. The river that you live next to is called the Rio de las Animas Perdidas, and most people abbreviate that to the Animas, but it means the river of lost souls, and that is an ancient name for that river. That is, if anyone's studying Inca, Mayan, and Aztec cosmology, it's very apparent why it was named the River of Lost Souls, and why the river that we call the Piedra River today is maybe a much more important river. And if anybody also is paying attention to the Utes and what they say about the importance of those rivers, then you begin to understand that the Piedra River and Chimney Rock are very important and sacred sites, and that it has everything to do with the orientation of that river, and that is modeled and repeated all over the United States. The Shenandoah River, over in the eastern United States, the Animas River, which is not the Animas Perdidas or Lost Souls River, but the Animas River that exists in eastern Colorado. You know, you start looking at them; they're oriented the same way. The sacred lake of the Inca is chosen as a sacred lake because the river that feeds it, and the reason that they are very important is because they line up with the Milky Way at a certain time of year. And in the Nahuatl language, to say that someone has died is to say that they have entered the waters. So you can begin to understand that they are taking a river on the ground into the river into the sky. And you know, we also have things like jaguars and crocodiles that show up in the petroglyphs of the eastern United States. Why do jaguars show up in the eastern United States? They show. I would hazard to get, and not only this, but the jaguars, you can trace them back, and their association with Native American religion goes all the way back into Peru, and into a place called Chavin de Huantar, which is an ancient place. Did I say Peru? I think it's, yeah, Peru. But also is a place that is carried over from the Amazon, and probably from the older, probably actually gets its start in the Amazon. But if you go to some of the Amazonian tribes today, they will tell you that tobacco use, and they have very sort of sacred and specific uses for tobacco, but they say when you smoke tobacco, you smell like a jaguar. And we know that they were heavily into the use of psychoactive substances, ayahuasca, DMT, peyote, other things, and tobacco was one of the most common. And I mean, think also of sort of our British American narrative of history. What did
Was tobacco used in the same vein as all the rest of those traditionally? I mean, you can't have like any kind of an experience with tobacco like you can with the rest of that stuff, right? Was it more recreational, or was it used in a very similar spiritual way?
Oh, it's very much a spiritual way, and the doses of tobacco that they're taking are much stronger. And when you take a very, very heavy dose of tobacco, it causes snot to pour from to pour out of your face, your nose, which you can also begin to understand the shamanistic tradition.
So this is where when the parent would traditionally catch their kid smoking, they're like, "You're gonna sit here and smoke this whole pack of cigarettes." They're really sending them down a path that who knows where that one's gonna lead.
Yeah, well, I think our narrative about drug use today also gets very interesting, and going back to again that British notion of addicted or addiction, and addiction meaning that you're doing, you're smoking opium, you're not working, and you can't pay your rent. Um, there were cultures of people who had a different understanding of who deserved to be a part of society, and maybe it was being was enough to be a part of society, and you didn't require a proof of work. Haha. It was a proof of stake society, not a proof of work society.
I was watching the Elon Musk and Joe Rogan interview the other night, and they got into a little bit about this in the discussion. And they were talking about, how certain drugs, one of the things that you could ask is, did this drug ever make me better? And a lot of people, they can never say that about meth or cocaine. But you talk to, a lot of these veterans, a lot of these people that are going through MDMA treatments, or going through the psychological treatments, or taking shrooms or taking weed, and they can actually say, this drug has made me better, and they go into that kind of that psychological thought of what actually makes a drug.
There is that. I've also, when I think about drug use, whether it be alcohol or, which is very accepted, tobacco or whatever. Yeah, I should say, whenever I was in Argentina in late 2006, early 2000, or late 2007, early 2008, I in Argentina they do this thing called shoot, now I can't think of it. Do y'all know the tea that they drink in Argentina? Help me out here. Anyway, they drink this special tea.
Oh, it's the one that comes out of that straw, right? Yerba mate.
Yes, it's disgusting. Don't tell them I said that. But I would always, I loved the practice of it. You walk around Buenos Aires, and like 60 to 80% of the people have a thermos, and everybody has a gourd, yerba mate. They stop and drink this tea, and people carry around hot water or the tea pre-made, and maybe a little bit of sugar. And anytime people stop to talk, which is all the time, they stop and they drink this tea. And I remember at one point, an Argentinian asked me, he said, do people do anything like this in the United States? And I thought about it, and I said, well, cigarette smokers and weed smokers do. And cigarette, like, I knew many people who took up smoking cigarettes in college because it was very social, or maybe even in high school, because they had a reason to bum a cigarette off of somebody in a street, or to stop and have a conversation, a 15-minute, 10-minute conversation with someone. So I think that the social practices that are around drug use are maybe even more so important than the effects that they have on a body. And when I think about, what's the difference between drinking a six-pack at home by yourself and drinking a six-pack over dinner or over a long conversation with a group of friends, or sharing a bottle of wine with someone and getting into a deep conversation. I think those are the more are probably a better understanding of what like the true value that they can bring into adding to our experience in the world. And yet we don't always consider that aspect of them. We think a lot about people abusing them alone, or using them as an excuse for the actions that they take once they have used them. And I think that maybe is putting the cart in front of the horse. If somebody's drinking a lot by themselves, perhaps they wanted some social connection to begin with. Anyway, that sort of that began to change my mind, or to make me think differently than the prevailing narrative about all sorts of different drug use that we sort of take for granted here in the United States. So, yeah, that said,
I mean, just to put a tiny bit on that, I know we are getting close to the top, but like some of the things that I've learned is that the traditional use of these substances is in shamanistic rituals. So like the ancient peoples had this idea of the medicine man or the shaman or whatever, and they would go into these altered states of consciousness. Oftentimes the primary goal of that would be to bring back some sort of knowledge or help to the rest of the tribe. And so you can think about it as this early way of accessing knowledge that in some ways wasn't accessible to the average member of the tribe. And so it was with this that they were taking these substances with the thought that unless they provided some utility to the tribe, it really wasn't of any use. Like you see a lot of that in those shamanistic writings or the things that were documented. It was a strong focus on community.
yeah, absolutely. And it's not, we're talking a lot about drugs and psychoactive substances, but chocolate was equally as important. And cactus juice, which I can't remember, chocolate was equally important over the Americas. I mentioned,
But it's a contrast with what I would say a lot of Westerners, how they approach drug use. It's much more self-centered. It's about my experience or my personal journey. I think that there may be, I don't know if Buddhism is more like this, but it's that seeking for self-enlightenment and even detachment from the rest of the world, or that you're seeking some sort of a personal experience. But I think if you look back, tribe, you were very much subsumed into the idea of tribe. Like I don't think there was a lot of identity outside of the tribe. But does that resonate? That's the way I think about it, or at least the way I've come to understand some of these things.
well, absolutely. Like, part of the narrative of the world today is that we want privacy. We want our own vision of the future, and we want to manifest that with some sort of degree of anonymity and like working for ourselves to build our private castle. But no, that was not how. And that's also not how religion works. And like, notice, church is not the word for a building, but a group of people. We are mammals. We crave ritual. We crave having metaphors and rituals that.
Well, it's a survival mechanism too. I mean, I don't know if you've like anybody who's ever gone out into the woods and then contemplated trying to live off the land, you quickly come to the realization that you're ill-equipped to do so unless you can hunt animals and just like pretty much eat constantly off of what you can shoot. And that's, I think, why this idea of a tribe and starting to have division of labor, and if you have agriculture, it's really hard to make it on your own. Essentially, I mean, it's almost impossible.
Amen. Well, I guess I 100% agree with that, and I think that that also, whenever it comes to addictive substances, it's very important to add some layer of ritual, or social practice or restriction on it to keep us from abusing it. I'm even thinking of sugar. You know, like there are older generations of citizens of the United States that didn't eat as much sugar as we have, like, put in all things now in processed foods, and you saved it for a birthday or for some sort of celebration. But now we have allowed ourselves to envision some sort of world where we can snap our fingers and magically the thing that we want appears, and maybe that's not the best thing for us or the best way to live. Sometime maybe let's come back to this and talk a little bit more. You know, we have endless amount of chances, but pulque, I want to get into pulque and chocolate and also some of the foods of the I'll just say Aztec. I hate to say the word Aztec. That actually refers to the sky, Etzlon. But that's a different story. I guess in short on today, I'm glad we addressed Graham Hancock. I would make an appeal to Wikipedia to reconsider the incredibly biased profile that they have with regards to Graham Hancock, and if anyone is reticent to listening to his ideas, I would say he opens up some very a new way of understanding and looking at the world. And I think that's also important in the time that we're at now, because in doing so, in opening up the arc of the timeline of human history, he also gives us the tools to begin to reconsider some of the conflicts in the world that we live in today. And I think it's a very important time to be considering that.
Really fun discussion. I think these things are fascinating. Enjoyed discussing the use of different substances shamanically by peoples. This is all fascinating style subjects. I'm actually going to check out a couple episodes of this because I want to see some of the places they're visiting, and maybe I'll check out one of the books. But we'll definitely catch up with you tomorrow.
I think I see more Graham Hancock